It is the night of the 24th of Shadows. The guard stands ready, watching the horizon as he always has. There is something on the horizon, a wisp of dust suggesting a rider crossing the sea of sand. Thinking quickly, the guard whistles for the other attendants, and soon the gate is being opened as the rider approaches. Welcome to Nycos. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is a Nycos Nightly News World Report. We are at the end of the year. We are going to be going over virtually every country on the continents of Growlin, Yarlin, and Nordland. So strap in. It's going to be a wild ride. We have, I think, 187 countries to go over, and I know it's a long marathon episode, but I promise some Easter eggs for my players who have been loyally adventuring throughout the world of Nycos over the decades. I have been a game master for 50 years, and I average between 6 and 10 adventures per week per year for as long as I've been game mastering. I started in 1973 and have never stopped. So, as I've said, buckle in. We're going to start right on the corner, the northwest corner of the map, and work our way southward, literally going through what's going on in each country. One of the benefits of the process that I use in the world of Nycos is that I'm able to keep track of what's going on in every corner of the world, and my players spend their time crossing the expanses either by airship, by sea vessel, or by caravan. And so everything that I'm going to be relating is going to have at least some tangential connection with our player groups. So if you want to be a part of our community, check out our Patreon account at patreon.com/Nycos, and you can become a member of our community and become an actual player if you wish on the games that we play on the weekend that are Patreon supporters only. So check that out and let's get started, shall we? So we're going to be starting in the country of Mantara, and as a kingdom of men, it is the westernmost flank of the ancient realm of the humans, and the mortal population still resides in the majority of the areas, although their governance in certain cases is left to other species merely because the mortal population with such a short lifespan doesn't really entertain much in the terms of interaction with the world at large. For the most part, they are merely subsisting hand to mouth and month to month. There are those, of course, that have endeavored to expand, and we will talk about some of those families perhaps. Generally, though, I will be speaking of the nations in a general term, talking about their current status, military leaders, if there are any of a particular note. Most of the kingdoms of the mortals fall into the category of window dressing, and that is that although there are a lot of relics and artifacts and interesting items and places to be discovered in the area, they're not generally fomenting or promoting any particular agenda, and that is the case in specifics for Mantara. They have a aging family structure, an oligarchy, if you will, and are basically keeping station. They have no current motivation to become other than that, and have of late only begun to consider what they might need to do in terms of national defense, as there have been some rather overt and even a few covert threats placed against the mortal population. Of particular note was the recovery and reestablishment of the message of the first broadcaster, Ralgrim, the Archangels. So we're going to be following that story rather closely. As you may recall, the self-appointed first chromate of the Prismatic Church has sent out a rather brusque message suggesting that the mortal population, particularly those who are foreigners, might be dangerous and therefore they should be considered a threat. So there has been a considerable amount of reticence to engage in trade. As a matter of fact, Mantara has fundamentally isolated itself by cutting off the caravans that used to provide them with resources from the kingdoms of the East. So at this point, we don't know that much about them. There is evidence that at least one of their armies has been advanced into the Sea of Sand, being sent to points unknown, and the groups of adventurers in the west have not been able to ascertain to what point that army was marching. So we will gather more information as we go along. Next, we're going to focus on the kingdom of Nyx. Nyx is somewhat of an anomaly. As a kingdom, they have only recently resurged in awareness. The adventuring parties themselves discovered the city of Nyx, which had been, according to historic records, destroyed in the last iteration. Not only once, but 3 times, as there were temporal incursions that continued to draw attention to Nyx, and they were systematically and summarily eliminated not once but 3 times. And yet, at the beginning of this iteration, they were discovered once again by the group known as the Heralds of the Change, headed up by the Queen of Cryopathia, Catelyn Noir, and the now titled Lieutenant Stormcrow, who has endeavored to cause some considerable provocation in the region and has marched an army northeasterly toward the city of Flo. They have retrenched their position in a palace known as Patroclus in the regions slightly north and west of Flo, and have begun to set up a defensive position. According to the reports, this army is set on the confrontation with the forces of the Middle Kingdoms, which we will get to eventually, and we will talk about that in a more particular note. If you want more information on the world of Nycos, you can check out NycosRPG.info, and there is a considerable amount of documentation on the various iterations of the world, but they are spotty and not directly connected. So it itself is kind of an exploration to go into that. Alrighty, so the Nyx population is majority Eldrin, and particularly the older species of the Eldrin, which are in size and dispensation smaller, more reactionary, and arguably both more primitive and more engaging than the classic species of Nycos in terms of Eldrin. So, as a matter of fact, they refer to themselves internally as the elves, which of course adds chaff, if you will, to the rest of the Eldrin population, who have deemed that word to be an insult, as they have become more refined and more, I guess you would say, self-absorbed. There will be more information, of course, moving forward, but at this point, the majority of the Eldrin Defense Force is still remaining in Nyx, not choosing to follow the Luthanen into battle in particular. A quick note beyond that is the one of the oldest cities in Nycos, known as Nexus. And although it has not been in direct interaction for most of the last iteration, nonetheless, it is a linchpin because of its close proximity to one of the ziggurats of power. In this case, it is the tangerine or orange ziggurat, so called because of the stones from which it is built and the color that emanates from its power source, which is the crown of the ziggurat, the large square structure on top. At this point, the tangerine or / orange ziggurat is lying fallow and is not broadcasting any energy signature from it, and yet it is a point of interest visible from nearly 6 miles at nearly 6 miles into the Black Sea. So the outer sea, I should say, in particular. Now we're going to talk about the kingdom of Amoric, but Amoric is of its own. Ooh, we missed. Where did we miss? Oh, hasn't been visited yet, but the Greek dynasty operates in the hills south of Nexus and north of Amoric, and has become sort of a pressure valve in the conflicts that are building. The Greek personalities are majority sect-gen and very introspective and not so much morally but philosophically minded, and tend to follow the old ways, which means that their religious affiliation more aligns with the ancient times, and they actually are one of the groups that are focusing upon the end times that are said to occur when the double stars rise, when the two suns rise together. And of course, at this point, there's only conjecture that such a thing should happen. It is historical. It has been evidenced in at least 3 of the 9 iterations, or rather the 8 iterations of the past, that there was a time when there were 2 suns in the sky. But there is no yet evidence that that is any time coming before us, although according to the prophecies it should be happening on the first of Vespers, which will be the beginning of next month. So at this point, just 7 days away. So we will see 10 days away. So we will see what happens at that point. But the Greek dynasty has not, as I said, represented themselves, and no one has visited their capital city, so that's why it's not on the map. Now, returning to the discussion of the kingdom of Amoric, the Urgluk, and the Groll, the beast men and the rock men of the world of Nycos, have thus far this iteration not interfered other than to create some harrying for one of the airships. But there's little that is known about their kingdom. It is claimed or believed that they may have actually been part of the force that was utilized to build the ziggurats, those power nodes that have been discussed throughout this iteration. But little is known of their species, and the fear of their ferocity and bestial nature has kept people from interacting with them for the most part. As indicated by the, well, I go into that later. That's all we have as far as knowledge of this area. Moving eastward, we enter the area known as the United Shires, and that is the areas of Brandywine, Nod, and Tamandagan. Collectively, they're known as the United Shires. In the past, they were separate kingdoms, and for literally hundreds of years, a civil war brewed between them. And their nature, both the Midge and the Peck, are manifested in their lifestyles. The north is very fertile, and the people are very pastoral, whereas in Tamandagan, as being close allies to the the gnomes of Havoc, tend to be much more industrious and focused on capitalism. So Tamandagan is arguably more broadly dispersed across the planet, but the people of Brandywine and the resources that they cultivate are much desired across the country overall. I do have to mention that we are actually working through the cities of the continent of Grolland currently, and this is the Nycos World Report. I'm Jonathan Albin, a game master with 50 years of experience, and at the end of each year I tend to try to draw attention to what's going on in each world in a Nycos World Report. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to include them here in the text channel, the comments section, or you can include that in our YouTube comment section as well, and I'll respond generally pretty quickly in reference to those. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or would like to know more, feel free to put contact in there. And of course, do remember to check out our Patreon program and become a part of our community. All right, so now we're going to talk about the Kingdom of Farthfell. And Farthfell is, again, a mortal population for the most part. They, again, are not particularly interested in expansionist viewpoints. They've become settled in their ways, and they are currently involved in a four-way civil war. In effect, there are four governors of the counties of Farthfell that are bickering over leadership and all laying claim to at least their portion of the kingdom. And so there are a lot of studies in history that suggest that the name Farthfell is only a couple of iterations old, and that the kingdom area of Farthfell once was instrumental in the development of the country, the continent at large, although most of that has been lost in time. The Farthfell is adjacent to the mountain range known as the Grithwall, and the Grithwall is the primary home of the Grimm population, and the Grimm are a subterranean, in the Nycosian population focused on mining and gleaning value from the resources found inside of the mountains. So we'll leave that. If you go a bit farther south, we have two more other points of interest here. One is that the kingdom of Farthfell does stretch quite a long ways, and so the villages of Scrog, Wormsweat, and the city of Abigail are points of considerable interest in the area, as they represent arguably the most organized of the factions, being operated by a county mayor by the name of Count de Monet. And there'll be more information on that in resolution coming up next week for what's going on during the actual beginnings of the war that is coming. We're really just setting the stage, if you will, for it, and I haven't yet got to one of the kingdoms that's directly involved with it, other than to mention that the Luthanan did march from Nyx northward to Florin to start setting up his defenses. On the southern end of the continent, we have the Tiora, and this is a well-known and established outpost used during the previous iterations. It has a facility known as Tiora's Watch, a primary focal point for defense of the world of Nycos. It is considered to be one of the southernmost facing mountain ranges and has a considerable reputation for helping to protect the world of Nycos against what appears to be a recurring southern invasion force. So we'll have more information on that as possible. Now, this is the second time we've seen these green icons, and I'm not going to go into the details of what those are until I've completed the actual world report, and then we will talk about it. All right. Continuing around the edge of Groland, we're going to talk a bit about Mercania. And the capital city of Mercania is Mercia, and this is known as the Sellsword Rialto for the majority of Nycos' history. The Mercanian soldiers have been considered to be the best of the best and have prided themselves on being sellswords, meaning that there are Mercanian warriors fighting in all of the major conflicts historically for at least a couple of iterations. And so being aware of that as we are entering into this period of unrest, the population of Mercania is swelling as individual warriors with any gravitas are coming here to be established as warriors within the Mercanian mercenary forces, and therefore are intending to be dispatched to the various kingdoms. Again, we're not going to go into the details of what countries have already employed them. Just know that they are fundamentally unassailable. Once they have taken a contract, they tend to remain on that primary contract. And only twice in the last 4 millennia have there been any interactions that would suggest that they might be disloyal at any point. Okay, so I already spoken of one of the ziggurats, these positions of power, and in this case we're going to talk about the blue sapphire. Now, the map here is suggestive that the majority of the central area of what had been Moria has been flooded, and that is true. There is a rather sizable source of magics in the form of Daemonarch that has now surfaced in this citywide region. The buildings remain, and it's much like the Terran equivalent of Venice, in that there are people who are still utilizing the upper floors and navigating by pole boats, and so canal boats, and so they're still functioning, although the Empress has retired to the mountains to the south of the city, and therefore is operating fundamentally in exile, as she's no longer operating from the capital city of Moria itself. A lot of potential drama is going to be going on there, but the adventuring group left here long ago, and so what little of the area that has been established and mapped is here. As you'll notice, there are a lot of blank spaces around Moria, and that's because the countryside itself has not been explored by adventurers as they arrived here, either by teleportation, other magics, or airships. So there's no actual tracking of what might be in those open spaces. So a lot more to be explored indeed. Okay, I'm going to hover over this area only for a moment to say there is an entire kingdom that has been avoided now for almost 2 complete iterations. One adventuring group did indeed pass over this during the swarming of the 8th iteration, but to date no one has even investigated or visited the ruins of Tirkun. This had been a primary city throughout the majority of the last couple of iterations before that. So iteration 5, iteration 6, Tirkun was instrumental, and now the only thing that's really left of it is the fact that there's a location known as Point's Edge, which is north of the ruins of the ancient capital, and that's only been passed over again by those traveling through in terms of airships, and so there's very little known about the region. Now we move up to the middle of the continent. This is north of the Wilderlands mountain range. The capital of the majority ruler of the Northlands is the capital city of Kordkorum, which is a city of the Ordnung. We haven't talked too much about them, but the Ordnung are the giantish populations in the world of Nycos and are established by a hierarchy based on the species and intellect. Most of the lesser intelligent giantish people still travel in nomadic fashion, basically pursuing the giant herds of beasts that they use as a food source, or farming large swaths with their or oversized beasts of burden. But for the most part, the kingdom of Kordkorum is known as the world capital in terms of legal issues, and fundamentally there is a system of marshals and sub-marshals that are known as consumables that take their position based on the instructions laid out by the kingdom of Kordkorum 2 iterations ago. These marshals are fundamentally judge, jury, and executioner, but they serve a very rigid law mechanism, and so these judicial decisions can be challenged if you bring your case to Kordkorum. Generally, these are being funded by the various legal organizations such as the Tenerife Protection Squad and the like. And we actually intentionally passed over Tenerife. We'll be going back to there in a few moments to talk about what their aims are. But know that the courts of Kordkorum are the final, last vestige of legal rights within the world of Nycos, and as those legal rights are defended by physical combat and more in combat arenas, it makes for a rather interesting legal system, let's just say. All right, before we dive down to talk about Tenerife, let's talk about Salafort and Elgath. Elgath as a community is one of the last vestiges of Eldrin authority in the Wilderlands, as opposed to Nyx. As we talked about, Nyx is a returning or resurging government, but for 2 iterations, the city of Nyx has been eliminated so early in the iteration that they have basically no claim to be laid on a leadership of this Wilderlands region. The Elgath is one of the primary cities of the Frey Lauren, and is an archetype of retraining, bringing the Eldrin population, who has been in a diaspora for 1,000, 1,500 years, gives them an opportunity to regain their culture and regain knowledge of what it was to be Eldrin. Pardon me. Salafort, on the other hand, is the second, or I guess you'd say penultimate, kingdom of mortals. As such, they are fairly well entrenched with the sec-gen population and have embraced many leaders who have been of the sec-gen population. At this point, both the king of Salafort, let me see his name real quickly now that I've brought it up. Pardon me. I'm fighting with the great desire to sneeze, so I may lose my composure here in a bit. But the king of Salafort is a man whose his name is Sunjin Smythe, and that is fundamentally Saint Jean with a different pronunciation, so it's ST period JEAN. So St. John Smythe, SMYTHE. And St. John Smythe's family has been de facto leaders in the Salafort region for at least 350 years or so. And their primary claim to fame is it was the only kingdom of Groenland that could compete against Mantua in terms of swordplay and such. So they also are known to be one of the Western caravanserai locations, and so their affiliation with the even older Jubileethan clans is well established and still very much prized. Okay, so we're going to drop now through the Midlands down to the area of Tenerife. As a southern trade post, what's interesting about Tenerife is that it is a majority population of Secgen, as is indeed most of the southern portions of the continents, merely because of the fairly inclement, humid, and muggy weather, making it suitable for the more, I guess you would say, more feral and more naturistic species. But as such, Tenerife in particular is also known to be the center of the majority of the crime operations, especially the large-scale, world-spanning guilds. And also, as a perhaps dubious distinction, is the primary resource from which the insurance companies have promoted and become involved in the countries. As a matter of fact, the Tenerife Securities Exchange is the largest transaction of cultural ownership of property over the rest of the world. And so, without going into any of the great details of the world of Nycos, Tenerife is nonetheless considered to be both a sophisticated but a very dangerous place to visit, as they have actually open laws that allow for what they call humane assassination. And this is actually death by intention, and is generally used as a way to count coup on one another. These families have been feuding for 3 full iterations and more, and so even as the population has become more sect-gen related, it's also become more civilized, dangerous, and shall I say Byzantine in its format. Okay, so we have covered the majority of the countryside. We have even talked about Terkun. So let's finally go to an area that is arguably on the peninsula between Groenland and Nordland, and that would be the areas of Olmara and Elsidar. Now, Olmara is not a city. It doesn't have a rail station, nor does it have a library system or a transit system. Nonetheless, Olmara is a linchpin in any involvement of the West at all, because the hands of Olma, the soldiers of this region, are integrated 5-person squads that protect each other and create a fairly impenetrable defense zone. It is known that the Empire of Man, which has marched out of Elsidar, only needed about a couple of weeks to overcome the Olmeron defenses, although there is no evidence that the soldiers or the forces of Olmera have bent the knee to the Imperator. So it seems as if they were able to pass their forces through Olmera pretty seamlessly, but did not successfully convert them. The next kingdom, of course, to talk about would be Elsadar, and the city of Eldrasar as the capital is the most populated city in the world of Nycos, with a very dispersed population. And the irony is that as a pardon me, as the western flank of the Imperator's army, or the Empire of Man's army, Elsadar, as a kingdom, is subject to the Imperator and his whim. It is known that the leader of this force, the Imperator himself, is none other than Darken Val, a Trolloran of some ill repute, who has convinced the populations of men, both here in Elsadar, but also in Florin and Gildor, to actually unify and to create the greater empire of man. And so these armies that are marching out have dedicated themselves to the concept of establishing peace throughout the entire planet. So this is the fundamental portion of the conflict, wherein the enjoined, the players of the world, are determining to stand their ground and try to stop this spreading of this concept of unified world peace. So we'll see how that goes. Now we're going to talk about the area of the Daemonskar. Now, according to history, ancient histories, the Daemonskar was once a floodplain wherein the majority of the waters of the Daemonskar were actually Daemonarch, the congealed essence of magic itself. This was in a previous age of civilization where magics were arguably free-flowing, and the power that a magi or a wizard had was unmatched. And while we don't have that power base still, this area is still, by and large, a very fecund and powerfully magicked forest area. It rivals the Wilderlands, with the exception that in the Wilderlands there seems to be a form of cultivation going on, as the Eldrin population of the past used to cultivate the powers therein, whereas the Daemonskar has a much more dark and threatening nature. Generally, it's an area of overflight where the adventuring groups have not actually ventured in there, mainly because they don't want to have to deal with the level of danger and monstrosities that are there. But the Daemonskar is also said to be the receptacle of some of the most powerful magic items of the past, as groups have been too foolhardy and risked it all to cross the Daemonskar on foot. Above Daemonskar is the city of Bastion, and Bastion actually occupies the spaces directly adjacent to the ocean here, and represent the last outpost of the others. This was a location in the previous iteration to which the others, being driven by the Crowmate and his first proclamation, had taken and created a defense post here. Now, since then, the Mir have moved on. They have abandoned this post, and yet its instrumental scientific nature has become instrumental in understanding the others. And so there are a considerable number of students and magi who spend their time in these locations. It is apparent that the Imperator did dispatch a force to attempt to convert Bastion, who still remains. It's unknown how much of that marching army that left Elsadar remains in Bastion. It is, however, known that there is a de facto passive siege laid upon the place. In other words, those conveyances of food and resources that were dedicated to Bastion have been either captured or turned back by the military of the Imperator. So more information on that in a later episode, of course. I'm going to mention the Shattered Stones briefly. This area is fundamentally uncontrolled space, so to speak, wherein there are large populations of Urglik, Grawl, and also Aruk. And the Aruk are in the process of reestablishing a unified kingdom under a new warlord who, for lack of another term, is called the Enlightened One, which suggests more than likely it is an enjoined who is trying to unify these tribes. Their requirements or demands for liberty and identity have been noted and in the past have prevented the unifying of the once great nation of the Aruk to reform. And so it is hoped, according to the reports, that this new warlord, I believe his name is Kantuk, can actually energize these forces and get them to start to create a more unified identity. Like the country of Neomoria, this area has not been fully mapped out, and although it is known to be shattered stones and a rough and broken countryside, yet there is no mention of any of the city-states or governances therein, and perhaps as time goes by, we will be able to establish one or two of those, perhaps in the next year or so. Before we go on to the second two mortal populations, I do want to speak a bit of Concordia. One of the northernmost cities in the world of Nycos, Concordia is a melting pot in terms of cultures and types of beings that are here. Historically, it was a structure or a location very similar to what we might consider to be the United Nations or the League of Nations, and Concordia was the signing point of a document back in the 5th iteration known as the Pact. There'll be more information on that when you look at the iterational data, if you will, on the 5th iteration, available at NycosRPG.info. But suffice it to say that Concordia's impact on the world has been seriously curtailed, as their primary transit sources had been the great ice shelf of Cryopathia, which unfortunately is no longer exigent. We'll go more into that as we move further east. So now we want to talk a bit about the kingdoms of Gilder and Florin. As the names indicate, these are cities that date back to between the 3rd and 4th iteration, and Florin, being the westward of the three, is fundamentally the middle of the Middle Kingdoms. And between Elsadar, Florin, and Potiphar, the Imperator's forces, it's rumored, might be as great as 100,000. And currently we are aware of only 4,000 that are deployed, and so there may be considerably more armies en route to destinations than what we know. So those of you that are participants or whatever with the games, make sure that you share that information with others, because we might have a better understanding of our enemy if we can identify what their forces are. Now, as you notice, in the area around Potiphar and High Point, there are several towns and villages that are instrumental to the story, such as Red Bluff, Kingfisher, and New Haven. These places are providing resources and associations with that are sympathetic to the forces of the enjoined, but they are also under occupation by the forces of the Imperator. So this is going to be a hotbed going forward of conflict, and Potiphar has already changed hands at least once in this conflict. So more to discover as we go through the iteration. Of particular note, Submarin is the only locale of the Mir. They are a human population isolationists that actually live beneath the waves, and Submarin is one of only a few places where commerce can be had with these mortal beings that live under the water. Of course, with the broadcast becoming prominent again, associations and affiliations with Submarin have become a premium item for many of the less well-intentioned species of the world of Nycos. So there's a story thread to be pulled there to be certain. Now we're moving, before we're going the rest of the way through Nordland, we're going to go ahead and drop south here into Yarland, Yarland being the third continent of Nycos. And so we're going to be speaking next of the kingdom and protectorate of Elwendale. And while New Haven is actually a village within the Elwendale region, its leanings are much more towards its Inandaran neighbors, which we will get to in a moment. But Elwendale is one of the protectorates of Nycos, meaning that all of the various kingdoms surrounding them have fundamentally created non-aggression pacts, so to allow commerce and such to pass through their borders uninterfered with. Their nearest neighbor and most staunch ally of the past has been the Inandaran, but recently the Sekgen of Slumber, particularly under the newest king, who is, don't remember what his formal name is, but he's a descendant of Babar, I believe it's Aloysius, has made strides to unify the boundaries between Elwendale and Slumber, actually overcoming the horrible fires of the last 3 months after the events of Firefall, which we'll be talking about here in a moment. The village at Bridgeton is instrumental in this connection between North and South, much as the dynasty of Grick. The village of Bridgeton really has been a safe haven for those passing both north and south. And despite being a fundamentally human population, there is a considerable number of Sekgen, both Bathrikin and Morrowind, who live there. Going south, of course, we've got the pretty much hot spot of the center of the known worlds, and that is the kingdom of Draconium. And as Moriah is to the warm-blooded Sekgen, so Draconium is to the Bathrikin. And as such, there has been a considerable amount of chaos and discourse, as it doesn't seem that the government can hold itself together because there are so many factionalizations. As such, the arrival of an army of the Middle Kingdoms has been instrumental to reestablishing a modicum of peace, and there's already talks about the possibility of building another Priest King's outpost here, but it has not yet been accomplished. Moving east, you'll come to Savannah, which is the southern reaches of the Greater Swarthier Republic, and although it is the center point of the pachyderm population, the Pac-Man, it is arguably one of the best examples of how a community has remained sovereign and yet not become itself a trade point. If you notice, Barbos is the next nearest of the trade capitals, and this is the center of action of the Seven Sea Princes. So the denizen of the capitals in Penza are arguably some of the more dangerous foes that you might meet on the black waters of the Twain Sea or even of the Outer Sea, as these seven brothers or seven factions vie for control of the land of Barbas and of the unity of the brotherhoods of the sea. Beyond that, further south, you get to what is arguably one of the vestiges of great knowledge of the past. What Alexandria was for the old world of Terra, so too is Candle's Keep a receptacle for virtually all forms of ancient and literature lore, and as such is a precious gem. It is rumored that it would be a notch in the Imperator's cash, so to speak, if he were to take Candle's Keep, but as yet he has not made any overtures towards doing so. As a matter of fact, a group of enjoined is even headed there now, having just left the village of Banbury. And you'll notice that both Banbury and Selk are encoded on this map, again, as villages, and though they are absolutely instrumental to the adventures that are at hand, they also are not locations to which you can travel using either the time train or other magical means. You simply must travel there via vessels and such. Another thing to note is yet a third of the emblems of power is a ziggurat known as the amber or perhaps yellow ziggurat, and it is currently occupying a space that is literally off of the map. So adventurers going there have to be careful for their loss that might be incurred traveling into those black waters. Next, we come to Snowland's Call, a vestige of the ancient ways. Like Tiora, it's a place that is associated with a ancient prophecy, and in particular, a dragon of some note. As a matter of fact, rumors are that the adventuring group heading for Selk actually did pass through Snowland's Call recently. Now, this vast unmarked wasteland here on the eastern continent is kind of ironic, being a traditionally well-traveled area. This is the broad kingdom that is known as Bylus, and in the next few weeks there will be some additions made to the map as some adventuring has been done in this region, but due to the necessities of the week, we're not going to be covering those. Of particular note in this region also is Canaveral, which is not actually a city of Bylus, although it is occupying part of its landmass. The city-state of Canaveral is actually the only surface established locale of the people of the Mere, and it's said that they connect to this region by canals and rivers and even springs beneath the surface of the region, and therefore, although the city itself is fairly desolate appearing nonetheless. It's said to house the largest population of mortals within its boundaries. So more on that as players make their pilgrimages to this area as well. There are several other smaller kingdoms that are in this region but have not yet been discovered, so we're going to move back up to the north. And here we find the northernmost post of the dragonkind, arguably on the southern edge of Nordlum. This may actually be the continental base for the dragonkind themselves, and it is unfortunately one of the subjects of the recent firefall. We'll come back to that subject here in a moment, but the idea here is that Valera is a very profitable and major city that is now suffering under the devastation of a unending fire that has begun beneath the surfaces of the mountain range. We'll go more into that detail in a minute. Additionally, we have the easternmost kingdom of mortals, which is Burglekutt, which arguably has only recently ascended to city status through the actions of the adventuring parties, and is itself a hotbed of human interaction, despite being a absolute opponent of the kingdoms of the Middle Empire. So as such, they're very vocal and are supportive of those groups that would stand against the Imperator and his forces. So watch for there to be a lot of action in Burglekutt over the next few months. Finally, we come to the middle ground, and that is Anchorage. And Anchorage sits on what had been a vast frost plains in the previous iteration, and only by mystical terrain manipulation, for lack of a better term, Anchorage has now become a trade location that has yet to fully benefit from the openness of their terrain to the north, as indicated again by the limited amount of terrain identity. There'll be more coming as players explore this region, in theory, during the middle part of this campaign. Matter of fact, we don't even know what the name of this city in the center is, so we'll be watching for that in the future. Alrighty, we have done the walk around Nycos, and I want to thank you for being here. We did make it to right about an hour. We will have more information on these locations each week with the Nycos Nightly News. Now that you have a reference point, feel free to go back and watch those videos that are in the Nycos Nightly News series, because now that you have context for all of the locations and what's going on, you'll be able to pick up more value from those episodes and understand that this is a living campaign that is 9 iterations old. That fundamentally means 13,627 years have been mapped out in real time by players engaging in this campaign throughout that ongoing period. I want to thank you for being here. I hope you're having happy holidays, and I will see you in the next episode. I'm Jonathan Albin. I'm the Game Master's Guide, and I will see you next time.